Ever had a meal that spoke of struggle, pride, and love all in one bite? In the 1970s, African-American families turned scarcity into soul-satisfying dishes that nourished both body and spirit. How did hardship give rise to recipes that continue to feed the soul today? Neckbone stew was one of those meals that proved you didn't need money to make something full of flavor. It came from patience, from taking simple, overlooked cuts of pork or beef neckbones and letting them simmer for hours until the meat practically fell off the bone. The broth turned into a deep, rich brown, thickened by the slow cooking of onions, peppers, and the gentle stirring of a wooden spoon, stirring in love with every turn. If there were potatoes or carrots to spare, they joined the pot, stretching the meal just a little bit further. On Sundays, the smell of the stew would fill the house, wrapping around the rooms like a warm, comforting blanket, calling everyone to the table long before dinner was even ready. There was no rush, no waste, just the comforting rhythm of a meal that took its time. You might not have had steak or a roast, but with a bowl of neckbone stew and a slice of white bread, you ate like royalty. It wasn't just food, it was endurance, care, and a reminder that flavor could bloom even in the toughest season. Every bite told the story of people who knew how to make something out of nothing and still find joy in every meal. Pig feet and beans took two simple ingredients and turned them into something unforgettable. The pig feet were scrubbed clean, boiled until soft, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and whatever seasonings were on hand. As the hours passed, the gelatin and fat from the pig feet melted into the broth, thickening it into a stew-like consistency. Pinto or navy beans soaked up all that smoky, savory goodness, turning soft and creamy. When money was tight, this was the dish that filled every stomach and left no one hungry. The smell alone, rich, savory, and inviting, was enough to make neighbors stop by just to talk about it. Cornbread was the perfect companion, soaking up every drop of the flavorful broth. Some might call it poor man's food, but anyone who tasted it knew better. It wasn't about the cost, it was about skill, love, and the ability to take what you had and make it something special. When the plates were cleared and the pot was scraped clean, all that was left was the quiet satisfaction of knowing you had created a meal that brought people together and filled their hearts, not just their bellies. Fried bologna sandwiches were the perfect symbol of a working-class kitchen. Simple, but never boring. Thick slices of bologna hit the skillet with a sizzle, curling into little cups as it browned and fried in its own grease. Soft white bread, cheap but perfect for soaking up all that flavor, was the foundation. A smear of mustard, maybe a slice of cheese, and suddenly it felt like a luxury for the cost of just a few pennies. It was the kind of sandwich that kept you going through long days, a small victory in every bite. Parents would fry them up after long shifts, and kids learned early how to make one for themselves, the smell filling the house as comforting as the laughter that followed. Some called it ghetto steak, but that was always said with pride, because it wasn't about the name, it was about the heartiness and realness of it. Fried bologna was proof that happiness didn't have to cost a lot. It just had to be cooked right and served with love. Collard greens with salt pork were the heartbeat of many kitchens, simmering slowly on the stove until the greens were tender and the pot liquor shimmered like liquid gold. The salt pork or fatback went in first, sizzling as it hit the hot pan, releasing a savory aroma that filled the house. Collards, washed and chopped, followed closely behind, shrinking down as they cooked, soaking up all that rich flavor. This humble dish could feed a family and stretch a few ingredients into something hearty and satisfying. It was the kind of meal that carried memory in every bite, memories of backyard gardens, of hands that knew how to make do. On the best days, the greens were served with cornbread, perfect for soaking up the pot liquor, that rich, savory liquid that was referred to with reverence as pot liquor. It wasn't just food, it was faith in a bowl, faith that even in lean times, something good could still come from the pot. Every spoonful tasted like history, hard work, and the essence of home. Cornbread and buttermilk bowl was the kind of meal that spoke volumes to those who grew up with it. No need for explanation. You simply crumbled yesterday's leftover cornbread into a bowl and poured cold buttermilk over the top. For some, it was breakfast. For others, it was supper. But for everyone, it was comfort. The tang of the buttermilk brought out the warmth of the cornbread, creating a blend of flavors that was refreshingly simple. For many, it was a taste of home, an echo of the South, where food was rooted in practicality and connection to the land. There were no meats, no sides, just cornbread, buttermilk, and the satisfaction of simplicity. It was a meal that didn't ask for much, but gave back so much more. A sense of peace, a feeling of contentment, a reminder that satisfaction often comes from what you have, not what you lack. Families who didn't have much could still find joy in that bowl, savoring the quiet joy of making do. Some added a touch of honey or a sprinkle of salt or sugar sugar if they could afford it. But no matter how it was made, it always carried the same message. That joy could be found even in the simplest meal. Cornbread and buttermilk wasn't just a dish. It was a feeling that lingered long after the last spoonful. Potted meat on crackers was a reliable staple that showed up when money was tight. When the paychecks were gone but hunger didn't wait, little can of potted meat sat on the shelf, always ready to be opened and spread over saltine crackers. It was salty, oily, and comforting in a way only canned mystery meat could be. For kids, it was a quick after-school snack. For adults, it was lunch between work shifts. The metallic tang of the can never really bothered anyone. It was quick, filling, and always there when you needed it. Pair it with a slice of onion or a few pickles, and it suddenly felt like a treat. Some even packed it for picnics or road trips, knowing it could last without refrigeration. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, dependable. Potted meat wasn't about luxury, it was about survival, making the most of what you had and turning something humble into sustenance. Every bite was a testament to kitchens where nothing went to waste, to families who knew how to feed themselves even when their pockets were empty. Potted meat was more than just convenience. It was the spirit of resilience, of doing what needed to be done with a sense of humor and a can opener. Smothered pork chops with gravy was a dish that showcased the beauty of thrift and resourcefulness. Bone-in pork chops were the cheapest option, so they were the ones that made it to the table. Dusted in flour, browned in a skillet, and slow-cooked in a savory onion gravy, the pork chops became tender, practically falling apart at the touch of a fork. But the real prize was the gravy, rich, flavorful, and poured generously over rice or mashed potatoes to make the meal stretch. With a little planning, a few chops could feed 5 or 6 people. The aroma of simmering gravy would fill the house long before the meal was ready, drawing everyone in with the promise of something warm and satisfying. And if there were leftovers, they only tasted better the next day as the flavors deepened and melded together. Smothered pork chops with gravy wasn't just about feeding a family. It was about feeding the heart and soul, reminding everyone that real comfort doesn't come from abundance, but from making the most of what you have. It was a meal that nourished not just the body, but also the spirit, showing that love and care could be poured into a dish, no matter how little there was to start with. Every bite was a reminder of the power of resilience and the joy of creating something wonderful from the simplest ingredients. Fried corn or pan-fried corn with drippings was how summer tasted, like heaven on a plate. Fresh corn kernels were scraped straight off the cob and cooked down in bacon grease or lard until they turned a golden brown and became irresistibly sweet. The fat coated every kernel, giving it a glossy shine that promised flavor in every bite. No need for butter or sugar. The corn and grease did the heavy lifting, adding richness and depth on their own. Sometimes a bit of onion or bell pepper would sneak into the pan, adding a touch of extra flavor. But the core of the dish stayed simple, just sizzling perfection. Fried corn could turn a basic plate of beans or greens into a full-blown feast, proving that sometimes the side dish could steal the show. It was a dish that carried the warmth of family reunions, Sunday dinners, and laughter echoing through a busy kitchen. Whether served to family or guests, rich or poor, it never failed to leave the plate clean, a testament to how food could bring everyone together. Cabbage and smoked sausage earned its place as the ultimate one-pot wonder. A humble head of cabbage, cheap and easy to find, met a few slices of smoky sausage in a heavy cast-iron pan. As the sausage cooked, its rich fat melted into the cabbage, turning a simple vegetable into a savory masterpiece. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar could be added to balance the flavors, depending on who was cooking, but no matter how it was made, it always satisfied. It was a dish that filled bellies, fed entire families, and left almost no mess to clean up. There was a rhythm to preparing meals like this: chop, stir, simmer, and serve. It tasted like the kind of food that came from hard work and thankful hearts. On days when the pantry felt bare, this dish could transform what little you had into something beautiful. It was the very essence of soul food, humble ingredients elevated by love, skill, and a little smoky flavor. Rice and red gravy was the perfect embodiment of simplicity with a Louisiana twist. Canned tomato sauce, onions, and a few seasonings came together to form a savory gravy that clung to white rice like velvet. When meat was scarce, this was dinner, simple, filling, and full of soul. The red gravy wasn't the kind you'd find in an Italian restaurant, but rather a humble, down-home version made from whatever ingredients were at hand. Sometimes a spoonful of bacon grease would add a little richness, or a splash of hot sauce would bring it to life with some heat. Every cook had their own way of making it, but the purpose stayed the same: to make something out of nothing. It was cheap, quick, and hearty, able to feed an entire family for just a few dollars. Kids grew up loving it because it wasn't just food, it was comfort. You could pour that gravy over rice and feel full, even if that was all all there was to eat. In kitchens where both joy and hardship were shared, this simple meal was proof that even in the toughest times, food could bring warmth, flavor, and a sense of continuity. Hot water cornbread was a dish so simple it almost felt like magic. All it took was cornmeal, salt, and boiling water, stirred together into a thick, gritty dough. You would scoop it into your hands, pat it flat, and drop it into a hot skillet of grease. The sound of it frying, sharp, popping, and promising, was a familiar and comforting melody in every southern kitchen. The cornbread crisped on the outside while staying soft and warm on the inside. It was the perfect companion to greens, beans, or stews, a humble yet reliable dish. This wasn't the kind of cornbread baked in an oven with milk and eggs, but the working-class cousin made from necessity and passed down through generations. It was quick, cheap, and dependable, the kind of food you could count on when there wasn't much else to eat. The hot water helped stretch the cornmeal further, allowing it to go longer without needing milk or eggs. Every household had its own twist. Some added a pinch of sugar, others used bacon grease instead of oil, but the heart of the dish remained the same. Hot water cornbread was a crispy symbol of resilience, a dish that turned the simplest ingredients into something golden and comforting. It stood firm against poverty, proving that even when times were hard, you could still create something good and filling from what little you had. Black-eyed peas with ham hock was more than just a meal. It was a rich blend of history, flavor, and quiet pride. The peas simmered low and slow with a smoked ham hock or leftover bone, transforming the water into a broth so flavorful it could almost be called gravy. Each spoonful carried the deep, earthy taste of the South, smoky, savory, and full of soul. Traditionally made for New Year's Day as a symbol of good luck, it was also a go-to meal for families working to stretch what little they had. Ham hocks were inexpensive, mostly fat and bone, but when simmered with the peas, they brought them to life. The aroma that filled the house as the pot bubbled away was the kind of comfort that went beyond hunger, reaching deep into your spirit. Paired with cornbread, it became a complete meal that left you satisfied and grateful, no matter how tough the times were. Black-eyed peas with ham hock was a dish born from endurance, turning scraps into sustenance, and that sustenance into tradition. Every bite was a reminder that no matter how hard life got, flavor and faith always found a way to meet in the pot, creating something special from the simplest ingredients. Gizzards and gravy over rice was a dish that showed you how to make the most of what you had, teaching the value of not wasting a single thing. Chicken gizzards, often discarded by others, were the star of the show in kitchens where love and creativity were the main ingredients. First, the gizzards were boiled until tender, then fried in flour and smothered with a rich brown onion gravy that had the power to stretch a meal for miles. When poured over rice, it transformed into a hearty, filling meal that could feed a crowd without emptying the wallet. The gravy soaked into every grain, making even the simplest rice feel like a treat. This dish was a prime example of stretching limited resources, and the smell alone could pull people to the table even before the meal was fully prepared. It was food made for tough times, yet it tasted rich, soulful, and comforting. There was something special about how a few humble ingredients, a cast iron skillet, some gizzards, and rice, could come together to nourish both body and spirit. It was the kind of food that made you feel full in every way possible, reminding you that love and care can transform even the most modest ingredients into a meal that feeds the soul. Macaroni and cheese made with powdered cheese was the ultimate comfort food when times were tight and comfort had to be cheap. Elbow macaroni was boiled until soft, drained, and mixed with the iconic government-issued cheese powder, or the well-known boxed variety that defined kitchens in the 1970s. A splash of milk, sometimes watered down, stretched it further, while a spoonful of margarine made the whole dish creamy and warm. Families would make big pots of it, knowing it would fill everyone up without costing much. If you were lucky, a sprinkle of real shredded cheese might go on top before baking. The result was a creamy, salty, and warm dish that brought everyone to the table, eager for second. For many, macaroni and cheese was one of the first dishes they learned to make, a simple meal that carried pride, even when made from the most humble of ingredients. It wasn't about what came from the box, it was about the love and care that went into making it, transforming powdered cheese into something that tasted like home. In many households, macaroni and cheese wasn't just a side dish, it was dinner, and it proved that even the simplest meals, made with what you had, could bring comfort and joy. Canned mackerel patties were the answer to seafood cravings when fresh fish was simply out of reach. The oily mackerel came packed in small cans, bones and all, ready to be mashed with eggs, onions, and breadcrumbs. Formed into patties and fried in a bit of grease, they came out golden brown and crisp on the edges, with just enough salt to keep you coming back for more. The smell may have been strong, but the satisfaction was even stronger. Families served them hot with rice or cold between slices of white bread with mustard, depending on the day. They were cheap, filling, and reliable, perfect for stretching a small can into a full meal. This wasn't fine dining, but survival food with flavor. When money was tight, you learned to turn whatever you had into something worth eating, and mackerel patties were proof of that. Though they came from a can, each bite carried the taste of effort and care, of making the most out of what you had, and feeding your family with love and ingenuity. They weren't just food, they were a reminder that even the simplest meals could carry the weight of survival and the spirit of making do. Sweet rice pudding turned leftovers into a dessert that felt like magic. When there was cold rice left over from the night before, it didn't sit in the fridge to be forgotten. Instead, it was transformed into something delicious. Mixed with evaporated milk, sugar, and a dash of cinnamon or nutmeg, the rice would simmer or bake until it became a creamy, comforting treat. If there were raisins available, they'd be tossed in for added sweetness, but even without, the dish was pure bliss in a bowl. The smell of warm milk and spices filled the house, stopping conversations in their tracks. Kids would hover around the pot, eagerly licking spoons, waiting for it to cool just enough for that first taste. It was a dessert born out of necessity, proving that comfort could come from the simplest of ingredients. For many families, sweets like this were a rare luxury, homemade, heartfelt, and shared among loved ones. It might not have been fancy, but it was love in its most basic, sweetest form, a reminder that the simplest meals often held the greatest joys. Fried green tomatoes were a southern secret that appeared in every kitchen with a garden, especially when the weather turned cold and the tomatoes refused to ripen. Rather than letting them go to waste, people sliced them up, dipped them in cornmeal, and fried them to a golden perfection. The tartness of the green tomatoes met the salty crunch of the crust, creating a flavor combination that was downright addictive. They could be served at any time of day, whether for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and they paired beautifully with anything from grits to fried chicken. The dish came from a place of thrift and practicality. Nothing went to waste, not even the unripe tomatoes. For many, fried green tomatoes were a way to hold on to the taste of summer just a little longer. The sizzle in the skillet, the smell of cornmeal frying in grease, it all felt like home. Some folks liked them with hot sauce, others with just salt and pepper, but everyone agreed that this simple, honest dish was the kind of food that never disappointed. Okra and tomato stew was a dish made when the garden gave generously, but the wallet didn't quite follow suit. Sliced okra, whether fresh or frozen, simmered with tomatoes, either canned or homegrown, until everything melded together into a rich, flavorful stew. The okra provided a smooth, silky texture, while the onions, bell peppers, and garlic added depth and flavor. Occasionally, a bit of sausage or a ham bone would sneak in for extra richness, but most of the time, the stew stood proudly on its own. Served over rice or alongside cornbread, it could be stretched into 2 or 3 meals if you planned it right. The smell of simmering vegetables filled the air, earthy and warm, and it was a dish that reminded everyone that abundance didn't always have to come with a high price tag. You could taste the effort of the hands that planted, picked, and stirred it. Okra and tomato stew wasn't just a meal, it was a celebration of making do, a reminder that every spoonful held a little bit of hope and a lot of heart. Homemade syrup biscuits were the sweet taste of ingenuity, a simple yet satisfying treat. When store-bought sweets were out of reach, families found a way to make their own syrup from sugar, butter, and water, boiled down until thick and golden. That syrup would be poured over freshly baked biscuits, still warm from the oven, soaking into every crumb. Sticky, sweet, and utterly satisfying, these syrup biscuits were the kind of food that made children smile and adults pause, savoring the richness of what they had. Biscuits were cheap to make, needing only flour, shortening, and a splash of milk. Yet they were filling and comforting. You didn't need frosting or fancy toppings when syrup biscuits were on the table. They represented a kind of resourceful joy, a reminder that even in the hardest times, something beautiful could be made from almost nothing. For families who had little, syrup biscuits were more than just dessert. They were a testament to love, to imagination, and to the small, sweet victories that came from making something wonderful out of what you had. Canned salmon croquettes were the centerpiece of many Sunday suppers, a dish that turned a can of salmon into something truly special. The pink salmon, bones and all, was mashed and mixed with onions, eggs, and breadcrumbs to form perfectly shaped patties. These croquettes were then fried in hot grease until they were golden and crisp on both sides, filling the house with the irresistible scent of frying fish. The smell alone was enough to draw the whole family to the table. They were often served with rice, grits, or just plain white bread, making a meal that felt like a celebration, even when times were tight. Some cooks added a dash of hot sauce or a squeeze of lemon to brighten the flavor, while others trusted the natural taste of the salmon to shine. What mattered most wasn't the ingredients, but the care and love put into each patty. The sizzling sound of frying croquettes echoed with tradition, a reminder that even in kitchens where money was scarce, dignity and flavor were never out of reach. Stewed chicken backs and necks were what many families turned to when they couldn't afford the more expensive cuts, but still needed a meal that would warm and satisfy. What the butcher discarded, they turned into treasure. The chicken backs and necks simmered low and slow, the broth turning a rich golden color as it absorbed the flavors of onions, celery, and carrots if they had them. The smell was a promise of something special, even if the ingredients didn't seem like much at first glance. The meat, tender and falling off the bone, was infused with deep flavor that no expensive seasoning could replicate. It could be served over rice or soaked up with a slice of cornbread, but either way, it filled the stomach and soothed the soul. This dish taught patience and resourcefulness, showing how to make the most of what you had. Though kids may have called it poor food growing up, years later, they called it comfort. The way the bones gave up every bit of flavor made the simple soup feel like healing for tired hearts. There were no recipes, just instinct and a little love. Stewed chicken backs and necks weren't just food. They were a reminder that nothing in the kitchen or in life should ever go to waste. Fried apples with sugar and butter were what you made when dessert was a luxury, but sweetness was still needed to close the meal. Overripe apples, often the ones no one would buy at the store, became a treasure when sliced thin and tossed into a hot skillet with butter. As the apples softened, they shimmered in the butter, their edges turning golden as sugar was added to create a syrupy amber sweetness. A sprinkle of cinnamon or nutmeg filled the air with warmth, making the whole house smell like love. These fried apples could be served over biscuits, spooned onto pancakes, or eaten straight from the pan with your fingers if no one was watching. Even the humblest kitchen could turn fried apples into a celebration. You didn't waste fruit back then, you gave it new life. This dish was a perfect example of how families could create comfort out of what might have been seen as scraps, transforming ordinary ingredients into something extraordinary. The flavor was sweet, buttery, and familiar, a soft reminder of home that lingered long after the last bite. Fried apples were a testament to finding joy in simple moments and the sweetness that could be found, even in hard times. Pinto beans with cornbread was a meal so fundamental it felt almost sacred. Dried pinto beans, soaked overnight, were simmered all day with whatever bits of ham bone, salt pork, or bacon grease were on hand, creating a broth that thickened and took on a smoky richness. The scent of the beans cooking would fill the house, steady and comforting, while a cast iron skillet of cornbread baked beside them. The cornbread would come out of the oven golden, with a crisp crust and a soft interior, perfect for crumbling into the bean. It was a meal that required very little, but provided so much: warmth, comfort, and the feeling of home. On days when the pantry was bare, beans and cornbread were a reliable source of sustenance. You didn't need meat or fancy sides, just a bowl and a spoon. Beans filled you up, and cornbread grounded you. Together, they made a meal that was far richer than the sum of its parts, offering a sense of fullness that went beyond just the physical. No matter how lean the week had been, when your bowl was full, you felt rich in ways that truly mattered. Pinto beans and cornbread weren't just food, they were a connection to the past, a meal that had fed generations and would continue to feed the soul for years to come. They were proof that sometimes the simplest meals are the ones that stay with you the longest. Crackling cornbread turned an everyday side dish into something special, almost like a feast. It started with the basics: cornbread batter made from cornmeal, buttermilk, and eggs. But the twist that made it truly stand out was the addition of crackling, crispy, fried bits of pork skin and fat. They were salty, crunchy, and packed with smoky flavor, folded right into the batter before baking. As it cooked, the kitchen filled with a smell so inviting you couldn't help but gravitate toward the oven. The crackling sank into the bread, leaving golden pockets of crispness, surrounded by the soft, buttery crumb. Served warm from the skillet, it paired perfectly with greens, beans, or any soup, soaking up the broth in the most satisfying way. Each slice told a story of resourcefulness, of cooks who never let a scrap go to waste. It was food that turned necessity into something beautiful, simple yet rich, born out of the practice of making the most of what you had. Crackling cornbread was the epitome of soul food, showing that survival could be elevated into something full of flavor, beauty, and pride. Molasses bread was a perfect example of thrift turned into sweetness, with a flavor that was rich and hearty. While sugar may have been out of reach, molasses was a pantry staple that could stretch over weeks of baking. Dark, thick, and sticky, molasses gave the bread a robust flavor and dense texture, filling you up faster than lighter loaves ever could. Made with whole grain flour, flour, and a splash of buttermilk, it was substantial enough to keep you going throughout the day. Sliced thick, it was perfect for breakfast, topped with butter, or served as a side dish to soups and stews. The smell of molasses baking in the oven filled the home with warmth, like a cozy blanket wrapping you up. It was old-fashioned nourishment at its best, simple, sturdy, and satisfying. Families often baked it in tin pans and kept it covered with towels to ensure it lasted longer. Even during the lean times, molasses bread brought sweetness that couldn't be bought. It was made with steady hands and the will to make the best out of what you had. Fried cabbage with onions was a dish that showed the power of a skillet and a bit of creativity. A single head of cabbage could stretch a long way when mixed with onions and fried in grease until it was golden and tender. The sizzling sound filled the kitchen, promising that something hearty was on the way. This dish was fast, cheap, and comforting, the kind of meal that made a simple table feel like a feast. A pinch of salt, maybe a bit of pepper, or vinegar if it was available, was all it needed to bring the flavors together. Fried cabbage embodied the spirit of making do, using what was on hand and making it taste like something extraordinary. Sometimes sausage, bacon scraps, or leftover fatback would find their way into the pan, but it was just as good on its own. When served hot alongside cornbread or rice, it could turn any meal into something special. It was food that filled bellies without fanfare, reminding everyone that flavor came from care, not cost. Every bite taught a lesson in simplicity, resilience, and the art of surviving with what you had. This was a dish passed down through generations, each hand adding their own touch to the timeless recipe. Boiled potatoes with fatback might seem simple, but they were pure comfort in a pot. You'd peel and chop the potatoes, drop them into a pot of boiling water, and add a thick strip of fatback. As it simmered, the fatback melted slowly, releasing its salty, smoky goodness into the broth. The smell filled the house long before it was ready, promising warmth and satisfaction even on the hardest nights. The potatoes, once plain, turned rich as they absorbed the flavors from the fatback, a lesson in how patience can turn the most basic ingredients into something filling and comforting. Some families added onions or a handful of greens to enhance the flavor, but most of the time it stood perfectly on its own. When it was done, the broth was so rich you couldn't let it go to waste. Every drop was mopped up with bread or cornbread until the pot was clean. There was no shame in a meal like this, only gratitude for the simple pleasures it provided. Boiled potatoes with fatback weren't just about food, they were about survival, resilience, and the quiet joy of making something satisfying from what you had. In kitchens where nothing went to waste, this dish proved that comfort could come from the simplest meals, feeding both body and soul with love, salt, and smoke passed down through generations. Sweet potato pie made with evaporated milk was a dessert born from love and creativity, turning leftovers into something extraordinary. When the sweet potatoes from dinner sat in the fridge, they didn't go to waste. Instead, they were mashed smooth and combined with sugar, eggs, warm spices, and a can of evaporated milk. It was a simple recipe, but the ingredients came together to make something special, rich and creamy without the expense of fresh cream. As the pie baked, the air filled with the warm scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and brown sugar, a smell that signaled comfort and joy was coming. The evaporated milk gave the pie a silky texture, perfect for creating a dessert that felt indulgent yet approachable. Every bite was soft, familiar, and deeply satisfying, rich but not over the top. This pie was a staple at Sunday dinners and church socials, a dessert passed down through generations, made with the kind of care that could only come from hands and hearts that knew how to cook with love. Sweet potato pie was a reminder that dessert was more than just food. It was about tradition, history, and creating something beautiful from what you had. Each slice carried the sweetness of struggle and the power of resourcefulness. Rice and gravy with scraps was a humble masterpiece, turning the remnants of a meal into something worth gathering around. Every cook knew the rhythm of making it. After frying up meat, scrape the pan, stir in some flour, pour in water or broth, and let the mixture thicken slowly into rich, savory gravy. Even the smallest scraps, bones, or bits of fat added depth and richness, transforming an otherwise simple dish into something hearty and full of pride. When poured over a bowl of rice, the gravy soaked into every grain, warm and savory, offering comfort in every bite. This dish didn't require a recipe. It was made from instinct, from the knowledge passed down through generations of cooks. You didn't need a lot of meat to make a satisfying meal. The leftovers were more than enough. For families who worked hard and earned little, rice and gravy was both a reward and a reminder that comfort didn't always come from abundance. It came from love and care in the kitchen. This was a meal that could stretch far and feed many. A dish that filled bellies, lifted spirits, and made the hard days a little easier to face. Cornmeal mush with syrup drizzle was breakfast for people who worked long before the sun came up. A simple mix of cornmeal and boiling water stirred into a thick, smooth porridge that was ready to fill empty stomachs and fuel a day's work. On its own, it was plain, but when drizzled with homemade syrup made from sugar, butter, and water, it turned into a sweet and satisfying treat. Sometimes the mush was poured into a pan to cool, sliced into pieces, and fried for the next morning's meal, making the dish stretch even further. Whether served hot or cold, it was a reliable meal that kept families going through tough weeks and cold winters. It didn't need to be fancy to be nourishing. Cornmeal mush was honest, simple food that never failed to comfort. Kids might have complained about it at the time, but later in life they would remember it with fondness, the warmth of it, the smell, and the satisfaction of scraping every last bite from the bowl. Cornmeal mush was a lesson in resourcefulness, showing that sweetness could be found in the simplest of meals, and that even in the toughest times, there was always room for something warm, steady, and comforting. It was a reminder that joy didn't need to be complicated. It could be found in the everyday moments. Souse meat, also known as head cheese, was a dish that made sure no part of the pig went to waste. Families would boil pig heads, carefully scraping the meat, fat, and skin into a pot. As it simmered, the broth thickened naturally, turning into a gelatinous, savory mix. Once pressed into pans and allowed to cool, it became a dense, rich block that could be sliced and served on bread or crackers. While it began as a humble dish, souse meat was a creative way of stretching limited resources into a filling and practical meal. For African American families during segregation, it symbolized resourcefulness and resilience. The ingredients, often considered scraps by others, were transformed into a sustaining dish through careful seasoning with vinegar, pepper, and spices, giving it a bright, tangy flavor that made it more than just leftover meat. Though children might have been wary of its unusual appearance, adults appreciated it for its ability to satisfy hunger and stretch a meal. Souse meat wasn't just food. It was history, necessity, and tradition combined. Every bite carried the story of survival, showing that even in the toughest times, creative cooking could turn what others discarded into something valuable. Hickory nut milk was a rich, nourishing drink that came straight from the forests when dairy was scarce or unavailable. Hickory nuts were cracked and pounded into a fragrant paste, which was then steeped in hot water and strained to create a creamy liquid filled with natural oils and protein. This milk could be enjoyed warm as a morning beverage, or it could be used to enrich cornbread or porridge, providing sustenance without relying on cow's milk. The technique for making hickory nut milk was rooted in indigenous American practices, which African cooks adopted and adapted to fit their need. Hickory trees, abundant in the southeastern United States, offered a steady supply of nuts for those willing to gather them, making this an accessible and vital resource. Even after emancipation, rural families continued to make hickory nut milk for special dishes, and it remains a part of some Appalachian recipes today. The smooth, nutty flavor of hickory nut milk was a testament to the ingenuity of African American cooks, blending local knowledge and old world traditions to create a food that lasted across generations. This drink stands as a symbol of resilience and creativity, linking the forest's natural bounty to a rich culinary tradition that continues to nourish and inspire. Pecan pie was a beloved dessert that added both rich sweetness and a satisfying crunch to community gatherings and family tables. Fresh pecans, abundant in the groves of the South, were mixed into a filling of eggs, sugar, and dark syrup, then baked in a flaky crust until the top formed a golden, glossy, caramelized layer. Every slice of this pie delivered a warm, nutty flavor, balanced by deep, buttery sweetness. For many, pecan pie wasn't just a treat. It was a symbol of hospitality and generosity, often baked in large batches for church fundraisers or community events. Volunteers would bake dozens of pies, knowing the familiar, comforting smell would draw crowds and lift spirit. The aroma of toasted pecans and brown sugar filled the air, creating an atmosphere of warmth and camaraderie. Children learned to crack the tough shells, sharing in the work that made each pie possible. Pecan pie wasn't just a dessert. It was an expression of the strength of tradition, of gathering together, and of finding joy in the simplest pleasures. It reflected the spirit of the times during the civil rights movement, when families, neighbors, and communities came together in unity, sharing not only food, but a shared sense of purpose. This pie carried the taste of resilience, reminding everyone that even in difficult times, there was always room for something sweet and a bit of comfort. Sorghum syrup cookies were a simple, rustic treat born from necessity. When sugar was too expensive, families turned to sorghum, which grew abundantly in southern fields and provided a thick, dark syrup that became a staple sweetener. Housewives mixed the syrup with flour, lard, and eggs when available, baking cookies that were humble humble yet deeply satisfying. The chewy texture and rich flavor of the sorghum gave each cookie a unique taste, full of the earthiness of the South. Kids loved them, especially because sweets like candy were rare, and these cookies offered a taste of sweetness in a world where little luxuries were hard to come by. They traveled well, tucked into lunch pails for school, or carried into the fields for long days of work. Sorghum syrup cookies were never fancy, but they carried the pride of turning simple ingredients into something special. They were a reminder of how families could create joy from the smallest of means. While sorghum syrup may no longer be a kitchen staple, these cookies remain a piece of history, representing the ingenuity and resilience of those who made something out of very little. Each bite was a reminder of survival, sweetness, and the lasting legacy of creative, resourceful cooking. Crackling cornbread muffins were portable, satisfying bites of survival, created by folding pork cracklings into a simple cornbread batter and baking them in muffin tins. Cracklings, which were just the leftover crispy bits of fried pork skin and fat, often saved after rendering lard, added depth and richness to the bread. Mixing these into cornbread turned a basic side into a protein-packed filling snack that could stand alone as a meal. For families struggling through segregation, these muffins were both affordable and sustaining. They were practical and, most importantly, resourceful, turning scraps into something delicious. Children loved the crunchy, savory pieces inside, while adults appreciated how it could fill the stomach and stretch a meal further. Crackling cornbread muffins reflected African American traditions of resourcefulness, where nothing went to waste and every bite carried a blend of thrift and flavor. These muffins weren't just food, they were proof that even in tough times, survival could still taste delicious, offering both comfort and nourishment. They symbolized resilience, creativity, and care passed down through generations. Pokeweed greens were one of the first signs of fresh produce in the spring, a welcome taste for those who had lived through a long, lean winter. The young pokeweed shoots, though plentiful, carried natural toxins that required several changes of water during boiling to make them safe to eat. This technique, passed down through generations, was rooted in African knowledge of wild plants, and enslaved cooks perfected it to turn the tough, toxic plant into a tender, spinach-like dish. Pokeweed greens were rich in vitamins, providing vital nutrition when gardens were still in their early stages of growth. The greens were seasoned with salt pork or a sprinkle of wild herbs, turning a once humble plant into a meal full of flavor. Even after emancipation, pokeweed continued to play an important role in Southern cooking, with poke salad festivals in Appalachia and the Deep South celebrating its cultural significance. The careful preparation of pokeweed greens passed down by African American cooks ensured both safety and flavor, transforming what could have been a dangerous weed into a nourishing food source. It serves as a reminder of the deep botanical knowledge, patient cooking, and perseverance that sustained families through the hardest time. Pokeweed greens represent a quiet but powerful link between survival, tradition, and the resourcefulness that shaped African American culinary heritage. Okra and tomatoes were the heart of a dish that turned humble garden vegetables into something extraordinary. Fresh okra pods, sliced into tender rounds, were simmered with ripe tomatoes, onions, and garlic until they melded into a thick, flavorful sauce. The vegetables' natural juices created a silky texture, making the dish perfect for soaking up with cornbread or spooning over rice. Okra and tomatoes was more than just food. It was a tradition born from using what the land provided and transforming simple ingredients into a memorable meal. Church volunteers would serve this comforting dish at evening gatherings, where activists and organizers came together after long, tiring days of work. For children who had helped harvest the vegetables from their own backyard gardens, it was a moment of pride to see their labor turned into a meal that nourished and brought people together. In the civil rights era, this dish symbolized continuity, reminding people that despite the hardships of the day, there was always comfort to be found in sharing simple food. Okra and tomatoes was a testament to the enduring spirit of community, resilience, and the power of food to unite and sustain during challenging times. Hoe cakes were more than just food. They were a testament to survival and ingenuity, cooked on a griddle or even on the flat side of a hoe over an open fire. When families had little more than cornmeal, salt, and water, hoe cakes were a reliable staple. Sometimes a little fat was added, if available, but even without it, they were hearty and satisfying. The cakes cooked quickly and could be eaten as is with syrup or alongside beans and greens, making them versatile and dependable. For many, hoe cakes were a daily part of life, a reminder that even with limited resources, a handful of cornmeal could feed the entire family. Children grew up eating hoe cakes, learning that survival didn't always require a lot. It just required resourcefulness and a willingness willingness to make do. Hoe cakes were humble yet powerful, proof that even in the toughest times, ingenuity and resilience could provide comfort. Though rarely seen today, hoe cakes remain a symbol of strength and perseverance, of families who survived hardship by finding creative solutions and making the most of what they had. The simplicity of hoe cakes still carries with it a history of resilience and survival, a history that speaks to the enduring power of food to nourish not just the body but the spirit. Cowpea and collard patties were born out of necessity, turning leftovers into something hearty and satisfying. By mashing together cooked cowpeas and collard greens, families could make a dish that was both filling and flavorful. Cornmeal or flour was added to bind the mixture, and the patties were fried to a golden crisp in hot oil. The result was a dish that transformed what could have been waste into something new and nourishing. For African American families, these patties symbolized both survival and creativity. They made use of every last bit of food, proving that even in the toughest times, nothing needed to go to waste. These patties were portable, practical, and satisfying, perfect for lunches, snacks, or dinner. Children enjoyed them for their crunchy texture, while adults appreciated the resourcefulness and economy that went into making them. Cowpea and collard patties were deeply rooted in traditions of ingenuity, where culture and necessity worked hand in hand. Each bite carried the story of endurance, of making the most of what was available, and of thriving through creativity. In kitchens during segregation, these patties were proof that even in hardship, there was space for innovation and flavor. They were a testament to the resilience that could be fried into every golden bite. Roasted gourd seeds were a clever way to make use of every part of the pumpkin or native gourd, turning what could have been discarded into a valuable source of nutrition. After the flesh was cooked down for pies or soups, the seeds were washed, lightly salted, and spread out to dry, often near the hearth, before being roasted to perfection. The result was a crunchy, nutrient-rich snack that could be stored through the winter. These seeds could also be ground into meal or used to thicken stews, offering a versatile addition to any meal. Similar traditions of roasting seeds were passed down from West Africa, where pumpkin and melon seeds were prized not only for their flavor, but for their rich nutritional value. These techniques traveled across the Atlantic with enslaved people, becoming an important part of the culinary history of African Americans in the United States. Over time, roasted pumpkin seeds became a popular autumn snack, enjoyed at fairs and harvest festivals, and later in modern kitchens and farmers markets. This practice was a perfect example of how African culinary knowledge merged with indigenous crops, turning a necessity into a seasonal treat. Roasted gourd seeds continue to carry the legacy of careful resourcefulness, reminding us how every part of a plant can provide nourishment. They symbolize the deep history of survival cooking that transformed scraps into sustenance, continuing to nourish bodies and hearts with each bite. Homemade Brunswick stew was more than just a meal. It was a community event. Prepared in large iron pots outdoors, it often took hours to simmer, with neighbors gathering around the fire, each taking turns stirring and adding ingredients. The stew combined a variety of meats, chicken, rabbit, or pork, along with tomatoes, corn, and lima beans, creating a rich, thick dish that could feed a crowd. The smell of the stew with its smoky aroma would fill the air, drawing people from blocks away. Everyone participated not only in cooking, but in the joy of sharing the meal once it was ready. This dish became the heart of many community gatherings, from church fundraisers to celebration dinners after successful rallies or voter drives. Children eagerly watched as the stew thickened, knowing they'd soon have a hearty bowl of it. Brunswick stew symbolized unity, cooperation, and the importance of shared labor. It reminded everyone that progress often grew from collective effort, with food as the ultimate symbol of that cooperation. During the Civil Rights era, this stew nourished both the bodies and spirits of those fighting for change. It was proof that even in times of struggle, people could come together, working toward a common cause while sharing the comfort of food cooked together in fellowship. Brunswick stew was not just a meal, it was a tradition, a symbol of strength, unity, and the enduring power of community. Cane syrup sweet potatoes were a simple dish that transformed humble root vegetables into something both rich and satisfying. During harvest time, farmers gathered sweet potatoes by the bushel, storing them throughout the winter as one of the few dependable crops that could withstand the colder months. To stretch their use, cooks baked these potatoes in thick cane syrup, which caramelized and formed a glossy, sweet coating that clung to each slice. The syrup added both the sweetness and the extra calories that were so essential in times when food had to work hard to fill empty stomachs. Sometimes the dish was served as a side, but in lean times when meat was too expensive or scarce, it stood on its own as a meal. Children especially looked forward to the sticky, sweet flavor, a rare treat when desserts were few and far between. Cane syrup was locally sourced and affordable, making it a lifeline for many Southern households that had to make do with what they could grow or afford. Although this dish has largely disappeared from modern tables, it once filled homes with warmth and a sense of comfort. It was proof that even in the hardest of years, people found ways to make the most of what little they had and still create something that brought joy and nourishment to their families. Cane syrup sweet potatoes were more than just a dish. They were a symbol of resilience, resourcefulness, and the sweet, simple pleasures of life. Which of these old dishes takes you back home? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories of soul food that connect us all.